Well, can you hand out the memo then?
Yeah, I can do that. Well, I'll do it when right after executive session. I don't want to take away from the presentation.
I think you're on, Mayor.
Hi, good evening and welcome to this workshop for January 18th, 2022. First on the agenda for tonight is energy and sustainability updates. We've got updates. We have Derek Belanger and Dan Goyette presenting tonight. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you for having us. I'm Dan Goyette. I'm the Director of Capital Investment and Purchasing, and this is Derek Belanger, who is our Facilities Purchasing Manager, I guess?
Energy and, yeah.
Energy. So today we went live on the City of Auburn's website. If you go to the city's homepage, I'll go back one, and just scroll halfway down. There is Sustainable Auburn. Click here to learn about Auburn's sustainability efforts and how you can double your efficiency Maine rebates. If you click that, it brings you to this new web page that we have that Liz Allen put together, Auburn's renewable efforts. Learn more. And this highlights, this is a great synopsis of everything we've done over the past, well, really 9 years. It started in 2013. We really began to take a look at what we did in terms of renewable energy, sustainable efforts, and all in the guise of help making the city of Auburn climate responsible or energy responsible. The first I'll have Derek go through most of these. We've worked on most of these, well, they're ongoing, but the natural gas conversion was the first one in 2013.
Yeah, so when I started here in approximately late 2012, most of the city facilities were still burning oil. In the case of Central Fire, they were burning diesel that was used for the fire trucks. And most of the systems were 30 to 40 years old, very inefficient, not maintenance friendly whatsoever. So we worked with Unitil to bring natural gas infrastructure to all the city buildings and use the savings from the fuel conversions we leveraged that to purchase new heating systems for additional savings. So as you can see, the savings were pretty significant. At that time, it was projected to be around $100,000 a year. And then from there, we got into LED lighting upgrades. Again, the facilities all still had, 1970 or 1980 original equipment, very inefficient, very maintenance intensive, and through rebates from Efficiency Maine, we were able to capture some more savings. And now these, systems that we installed are good for 20 to 30 years. And then the next one was the streetlights. This was a good project. They made some changes. I think it was back in 2014 or 15 at the state level, allowing municipalities to purchase the streetlights. So we were able to take advantage of that. We purchased the streetlights from CMP, and at the same time converted all the old technology to LED, and also added smart controls onto these, so that now you can see, if you scroll down a little bit, Dan, we've got an interactive dashboard that we can see every single light in the city. We know its attributes, what it is, that we can dim it if we need to. We can turn it on and off right from one central location. And the savings were very significant. They're approximately $20,000 a year. So, $200,000 a year. So we were around $20,000 a month for our bills, and now we're down to close around $2,000. So it was a significant savings. In 2019, again, more rule changes at the state allowed for us to enter into agreements directly with renewable energy firms, such as solar, hydro. We did an RFP process, and the operator, Eagle Creek of Hackett Mills facility right here on the Minot Pole and Line, put in a proposal to us that was attractive, and So we jumped on that with an agreement with them, and that's been, I think, since March is when we started receiving credits from that facility, and that's projected to produce approximately half of the city's electrical needs, and that's a 20-year agreement as well. The positive to that was that there was no construction needed, no permitting, no design. It's already in operation, so we were able to jump right into it and get credits. One of the first in the state to start receiving those credits. Since that was only approximately, around 50% of the load, we were looking to achieve somewhere between 70 and 80% of the city's total electricity needs. So we also signed in a solar agreement for an additional 30%. That's right now in the permitting phase, and they're hoping to get that constructed this year in 2022.
Both of those contracts, both those RFPs were received at the same time in 2019. It's just solar has taken a long time. So you can see it in the paper, the permits,
Yeah.
the hookups, the construction, all of
Yeah.
that takes a lot longer.
Exactly. And also through Efficiency Maine grants, we have installed a total of 6 EV charging stations in the parking garage right here, 2 on the ground level and 4 up on the 3rd level. And they're used for a mix of public use, staff, as well as the municipal fleet vehicles as well. And by installing those, it allowed us to purchase 2 electric vehicles for city use, which are now currently in use. And there's many benefits along with reduced carbon emissions and all that goes with it. Maintenance cost is virtually no maintenance. And an interesting note on that: the hydro facility that we've signed the agreement with. One of the accounts that receives credits from that is City Hall and the parking garage. So that electricity is renewable, clean, zero emissions coming here, powering a zero emission vehicle. So it's not, you're not plugging into somewhere that it's getting coal-fired power. And lastly, this is being deployed right now as we speak. It's an artificial intelligence solution that sits on top of our building automation system here at City Hall, and it works through algorithms to adapt and save us money, essentially. It learns the building, learns how the occupants work and their schedules, as well as takes into account outdoor temperatures and all that for increased occupant comfort, reduces energy consumption, monetary costs, and also prolongs the life of equipment by reducing run times. And that's, for further additional savings as well.
So, in addition, you'll all remember that the previous council last year adopted a matching rebate program with Efficiency Maine. It allows residents in Auburn up to $1,000 match to their Efficiency Maine rebate on things like heat pumps and building envelope improvements, added insulation, all of the things that you can take advantage of at Efficiency Maine. The city's program will match that up to $1,000 per year. So you could do $1,000 last year, you can do $1,000 this year, do $1,000 next year. There was $250,000 allocated. So far, last year, there was $22,000 divvied out, and we're hoping that that program continues and more residents take advantage of it this year. Also last year, I believe the first month that we were in operation was October. We have 2 food composting facilities or locations within the city, both located by each sand shed, resident sand shed. So one at Public Works and one at the fire station in New Auburn. This allows residents to bring their food scraps to these facilities. There's 2 bins. You just empty your bin into that bin, and they get hauled off every, it's 1 to 2 weeks, depending on how full they get. And the the contractor we work with monitors to see how often they need to come, how many, if they're full every time, there's the options in the contract to bring an additional bin. Basically, this is sort of the pilot program to see how well it's received in Auburn and how many facilities like this should deploy throughout the city. So with that, what's next? With the city's purchasing policies, we are still looking at additional EVs in the city. We were planning on buying another one last year, but the Chevy Bolt had an issue with its battery, as you remember, and so Efficiency Maine put a pause on all purchases for a little while because we were going to partake in their program to basically, we were going to save $22,000 versus buying a gas-powered vehicle, buying an electric vehicle. So with that, we would have just used electricity instead of gas. So the savings were huge, but unfortunately, we ran into that problem. We're looking at deploying additional EV charging stations in other locations. There's been talk of possibly out by Norway Savings Bank Arena in that location, so there'd be one over by the mall. There was talk at other municipally owned parking lots. Those are still being looked at. And we're still looking at other energy solutions, whether it be deploying solar panels on city buildings, windmills, basically taking advantage of every opportunity we have to use green infrastructure as much as possible. So with that, we have on the website, there are some links to some very good websites, very informative websites at the state and federal level. And we'll open it up to questions.
Can you just advise the council about the revision we need to do with the
Yes.
resolution that
The
was passed?
state of Maine has their new Policy of Innovation Future grants that they're starting to look at. The last council adopted a resolve with regards to renewable energy and green infrastructure. That resolve will need to be amended to meet the language required by the state. Part of their
Yeah, the Maine Climate Action Plan.
the Maine
right?
Climate Action
Yep.
Plan, thank you. There are specific portions of your resolve that need to be in line with what the state has, so we will need to relook at that resolve and make a few amendments so that it matches the state requirements, so we'll be eligible for those funds.
There's a
Yep, there's a template. Brian has it. I think the next one or two council meetings, you'll see that before you.
Great. Council, any questions on this? I mean, this is beautiful, by the way. Look, feel, just the interoperability is really, really nice. So congratulations, great job. A, saving us a ton of money. B, saving the environment, and B, kind of making it easy to digest. Any questions?
Go back to the waste, please. Tell me if they've told us anything on what has happened at this point.
In terms of the composting?
Yeah,
I know they've been through 2 cycles. They've been picked up. It gets brought to their facility where they compost it. So far, I know the 2 bills, the monthly charges have ranged from $100 to $150. So yeah, it's negligible to our solid waste costs at this time. I don't know the tonnage. I wish I would have.
when we entered into this, was there any kind of deal saying that they would advertise once in a while? I talk to people almost every month, and nobody knows in Auburn where this is.
We did send out a press release at the time. There was a was it the blast that Liz puts out, and it's been on our Facebook page.
Yeah, we keep promoting it through social media. I think the more that COVID restrictions lift and we're more in the public and having more meetings, we'll push it out further. We compost though, we compost it. They do have us added on their website. So if somebody's looking to do composting, they're gonna see that those locations are available in Auburn and where they are.
Any other questions?
Yeah, a question on how do people pay for their charging? I've never asked the question. I never even thought of it. Is it like put a credit card in?
Well,
Or?
it all depends. Like Tesla, when you buy Tesla, you have the option. Some versions of Tesla, you get free charging at their stations forever. Some you have to pay by credit card. The City of Auburn is actually free of charge.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we advertise that or we don't, but
So that would be at taxpayer expense?
So it's, yeah,
Is that what
Every-
that means? So
At-
the taxpayers are paying for people with electric vehicles?
Well, let
Yeah.
Derek just kind of explain this.
Yeah, and in the power, that's, you know, the electricity is coming from that hydro operation, so it's coming out of that net savings that we are seeing. So there's no increase to the taxpayer from before.
There's a decrease in the savings to the taxpayer.
That's correct. Right now, we're not seeing a ton of use. I mean, it's here and there. And when we looked into the card software and all the systems that you'd have to put into it, the payback on that to charge, because most people are only charging, you know, maybe $1 or $2 an hour. It's very, you know, it's pretty
it's
cheap.
not as
It's
expensive.
not very expensive.
Yeah,
So
I'm
that's,
just pointing out that it's
yeah,
not free.
yeah.
I do think that we could probably, if I could on that, I mean, this is predominantly being used here in the garage for city business and city
Yes.
vehicles, and that's gonna grow. There's some
Yeah.
new, it's probably a good thing that the Volt got pulled from the program, because just in that last year and a half, there's a lot more cars that are EVs that you can choose from with great financial packages. But I would like, and I think we've talked about this outside of a meeting too, to look at the credit card enabled chargers at Norway Savings Bank and in partnership with high traffic areas that have people that are parked. And there's a couple of models from pure electrical kilowatt charge to a hybrid of kilowatt charge and a per hour charge for something like Main Street or Norway Savings Bank, so they're not gobbling up the space for 8 hours. But
Yeah,
that
these-
might,
These are,
as,
the charging stations here in the parking garage are restricted.
Yeah.
So you can't park there all day and charge your vehicle.
I mean, listen, it's not, I don't think it's urgent, but in the next couple of years, I think the predominance of EVs will happen.
Sure.
I also want to think about, or get the planning board to think about next year, what are we going to do with all the gas stations that are going to go out of business in the next decade? What are those are going to be converted to? So I think there's a lot of thought process, but this is great. Saving money, great for the environment.
And the city also has a vehicle that they charge.
Several, yes.
Yes.
A couple things, if we could, on this, and I don't want to add work, but Mr. Manager, is it possible to incorporate in some of this what the schools are doing for sustainability as well with regards to LED upgrades? I know they are. I'm not sure if they're publicizing it, but I think a one-stop shop so that all residents and taxpayers could actually see some of those cumulative totals would be great, and some of their initiatives. And is there any update on the food composting add-on for the high school or schools, or any thought on that?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where Dennis is with that.
Okay, so I think
But there is
the
discussion.
Park Avenue School had a pilot project
Yeah.
that ended, but currently the high school is not doing a program, so it's something we'll have to continue.
Okay, that was a request from the student representative to the school committee.
And remember, the more we divert putting compost and our waste, I know that what was up there on that page, and maybe we need to add a little bit on it, because it talks about 30% goes into your landfill. But to keep in mind for us, that compost goes into our waste that goes to Maine Waste to Energy, which then creates more, it takes more power to burn off that wet food, where if that was removed from that, we'd have a better return on what Maine Waste to Energy. So, so that's another reason why if we can get more people to do that, there's a lot of benefit in it.
Mr. Mayor, are these also being marketed towards businesses as well, such as restaurants?
We compost it, that's their business model. They do that with businesses, restaurants, so that's part of what they do.
Okay, so it's already
Yep, if they so choose.
Well, great. Oh, I'm sorry, Dana?
At my previous employer, I worked with a composting. I think it was We Compost It to get my business up to composting everywhere. And one of the things that they provided as an incentive for us to use that service was once a year we were able to get a couple loads of compost that we would just give out to employees. I just wonder if that's something that they would do for the city of Auburn to maybe back up a couple of trucks
Something in
with
there.
compost.
I'm not sure what.
I think for the municipality, it was gonna require almost the municipality to do it as part of a service, and then they get it like a bucket of compost soil. But so that wasn't in our pilot program.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, which will be item B, disorderly property ordinance, with the city manager, Phil Kroll, presenting.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. When you look at the disorderly property ordinance, we've had conversations recently regarding some of the challenges with buildings that are not owner occupied and some of the issues that we've had with repeated calls for service for those neighborhoods. We started doing some research to take a look at what we could do. What we found was that we have actually several communities in the state of Maine that have adopted this ordinance, which is called the Disorderly Housing Ordinance. I did include in your packet 2 communities, the City of Portland and the City of Gorham. What I would recommend, and let me just give a brief overview, and then we could talk about this a little further. But basically what it says is that there'll be this minimum time of at least 3, most have 3 visits of the police department responding to a resident or an apartment building for disturbance-type calls. They do have a minimum of 3. If they hit that threshold, after that, then there's enforcement action that can take place on the property owner because of having tenants, guests, residents, whoever they might be in the building that is disturbing the community. The program, the way that they've been written, allows for certainly not taking away from somebody who's calling for legitimate police service. That's not included in that minimum 3. If somebody is calling for a domestic violence situation or protection from abuse order issue or whatever it is, that's not included in there, or a child trouble issue, that wouldn't be child abuse case, that wouldn't be included. These are strictly disorderly type calls, nuisance calls, that create a lot of service, which require multiple returns, but also has an impact on the neighborhood. That neighborhood is feeling that, there's this disturbance all the time, the police are there, because the disturbance most of the time does not just stay within those 4 walls. Most of the time it spills out into the street, into the neighborhood. So the reason why I put these 2 examples is because I like language in both of them, that I think we could take the best of those 2 languages and blend it into one ordinance. Because Gorham's ordinance really talks about ensuring that we're communicating that we never want somebody to be deterred from reporting to the police for some type of violent situation that's happening in the home. We always want people to make sure they're calling, and that shouldn't be an issue. Gorham does a good job of highlighting that. Portland really does a good job of highlighting that enforcement component. City of Portland's only had 1 violation after putting this into place. Once they got the word out, communicated it to landowners, so they've had 1 violation since then. And they are also at a minimum of 3. Some communities have 5. But I think 3 is the right threshold after hearing from Portland, what they do. And then, having the chief run some numbers. What we'll do is, if the council is good with this, we'll prepare this in an ordinance format for you. We'll do a first reading, and at that time, the chief will provide some data so you can have an idea of what types of calls are we responding to. How many locations would this have an impact on? Any questions about this?
Am I reading it right? You're saying minimum number of times in a
30
30-day
days.
period?
30-day period, yes.
That's
So-
a rolling 30?
Yeah.
So as long as they don't cross that threshold if you hit that three times in a month, you've got to stay away from that for now. Once you come back to that and you come to an agreement, you got to meet with the police department, the city, come up with an agreement, and you've got to go 3 years without hitting that. And so that enforcement component is pretty strong, but it ensures that the landowner is doing their due diligence. And I think this is where there's some flexibility there, right? If the landlord's willing to work with us, a lot of people own apartment buildings. You all know sometimes you can get a bad tenant, and that might be a while to try to take care of that issue. But this at least deals with that, but then creates a good opportunity to have that communication with the landowner, the property owner rather, because sometimes that's what we don't have that now. A lot of times, if it's an absent landlord, they will not return calls, they may not follow up with us. This ordinance requires that notification, requires for them to submit back within the, I think it's 5 days, a response back to the city that they will meet and talk about what they need to do to prevent this from happening further.
Now, is it 3 per person or 3 in the building itself?
So the property, whatever that address is for that property, minimum of 3 within 30 days.
Okay, that being said, if, say that the next door neighbor consistently cries wolf and calls constantly, and are we assessing each violation as we're going through it?
Yeah, as we're going through it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the PD would take a look at that type of call,
Yep.
what was happening, was it founded, not founded? Because that could happen, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep. The ordinance does allow for an affidavit to be submitted by a neighbor. So the neighbor, maybe they didn't call, but this is a problem that they're experiencing. They could submit an affidavit and say, this is what took place. If they're able to show that that did occur, then that could be considered.
Perfect, thank you.
Now, when you talk about neighbor, I mean, say like, I'll say at Barker, can one of the tenants complain and be classified as a neighbor to be able to do it? Or does it
Yeah,
have to be?
anybody within that building,
Right.
they could make an affidavit.
Okay, thank you.
I think you just said that you were, you could put some data together, but do you have any guess off the top of your head of what types of things or what types of buildings would potentially use this ordinance?
Yeah, sure. We have some apartment buildings that we have absent landlords that are just negligent on doing the right thing within the neighborhood and within the community. And so we probably have at least, I look at the chief, at least a dozen probably, where that's currently happening right now. And where we're there on a regular basis. And a lot of times it's, maybe it's somebody then moves out and our call volume drops, but it's a consistent issue. Where they're just not they're not taking responsibility as a property owner to ensure there's a good process and dealing with problems that they have within their building. And many times it's not even the tenants, it's whoever they're allowing there as a guest or whatever else, and that might be the issue. So if you're able to address that with a landowner, then they're going to be more willing to say, look, I'm not going to jeopardize my property. Let's take care of this issue.
Thank you very much.
Okay?
We'll look forward. Council, I can't ask for a
Yeah.
vote, but we're all fairly
Yeah.
consensus on moving
Yeah,
forward.
quick question.
Please.
Could you apply this to group homes, Phil?
So it's any property.
Any problem?
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have consensus?
Residential property. I'm sorry, residential property.
So, yeah, we'll look forward to seeing this in a future agenda item. Next, we're going to keep Phil in the hot seat to talk about taxis.
So when we did the 15-year review, and we did this with the last council, we did talk about, we went through the entire ordinance, all the ordinances, we talked about it. We said we would circle back on taxi cabs, and just bandwidth just didn't happen right away with the last council, so I'm bringing it back before you. One of the issues within the taxi cabs, we currently have one licensed taxi cab business in Lewiston and Auburn. And we've talked, I've talked personally with that business owner often, starting probably over the last couple of years, about some of the challenges when it came with transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft coming into the community, not needing to meet the same requirements that they had to meet as a cab. Really has an issue with really not a fair playing field for the cost that came with a taxi cab company that doesn't come with an Uber driver that can just automatically, through a licensing process, just start operating in our community. This ordinance kind of addresses that. I talked to the business owner. He's very happy with the language that the recommended language that we put forward. Basically, what we're doing is we're eliminating a lot of the regulation that was assigned to them, like inspecting their taxi cabs, getting every taxi cab driver to license with us, and having a fee on each one of those drivers, having a fee on each one of those cabs. Now it's just a straight annual fee for our license, a business license, like any other business in the community. There's an annual fee. It puts the responsibility on the taxi cab business to ensure that the drivers that they're hiring meet certain standards. So those standards were left in the ordinance to ensure that they're not hiring somebody who has a suspended license or has been convicted of a crime that aligns with a safety measure that you would not want to have your taxi cab driver operating in your community. So there's still some safeguards in there, but eliminates a lot of the regulation. Just to help our businesses, we need our taxi cab service. They're offering they're running right now over 300 pickups in the community every single day. And so that's a valuable necessity for our transportation system. We've got to keep them there, but how can we make it so it's a little more affordable for them to stay in business? This does that. The business owner's pretty pleased with it. And as you can see, it's a couple $100 in revenue for just the one license we have right now.
So this will come forth on a future, probably the next council agenda item?
Next council, yes, yeah, the ordinance is already there. Please give me some feedback if you got thoughts on it. But yeah, that's what you'll see moving forward. And as I said, the business owner is very pleased with the ordinance change.
Any questions? Straightforward, streamlined, less regulation, more impact. Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Next, just so I can mention to everybody watching from home, we are running ahead of schedule on workshop. So we're going to take, I'd like to take economic development executive session now versus at the end of the meeting.
Labor.
Oh, I'm sorry, labor. And we are canceling one of the economic development
That's correct.
workshops for tonight. So labor negotiations. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion to enter into executive session to discuss labor negotiations pursuant to 1 MRSA, Section 405.
So, second.
Got a motion from Councilor Milks and a second from Councilor Walker. All those in favor? Okay, we now stand in executive session. We will be coming back for more workshop items before our regular council meeting at 7 o'clock. Wait for it to go. After. Executive session, thank you. Next on the agenda, we're back to workshop items, is the city council vision and goals. And we're gonna have City Manager Kroll present as he put everything together based upon our retreats and past couple meetings.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I sent to you in the packet, and I believe I sent it to you separately too, the one thing that as we were talking about goals, when we had our retreat, we took what you had shared and we created these goals. They're basically in alignment with, some of them have been past goals, but some of them are newer. But what we also did was we took the strategic plan and we took some of the goal statements within the strategic plan and looked within these goals to see where do they align. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. What I'm asking for you tonight is, what is not included in that goal that you want to make sure is included? So if we start with planning for a better future, which is a broad goal, obviously. But then as we look at the statement, we want to make sure that we're including some other elements within that. And all I'm looking for is, if there's one or two of these that you're like, under reclaiming streets, you'll see there's not a lot there. So if you're like, reclaiming streets could be everything from infill within the downtown area. That's reclaiming that street. That's building up our street, the way it looks, the way it's designed. That means you could be adding that. And I think we talked about walkability, and you'll see in here, it's also talking about investing in and maintaining infrastructure, make sure things are safe, livable environment. So we're using some of those statements that probably about 100 residents participated in for the strategic plan. I believe that was a good process. We think taking some of that language that they had already came up with and bringing it into your goals, I think will be important because that'll align with the strategic plan. But what I would like to know tonight is, what's missing? What do you, as you looked at that, what didn't we include that you want to make sure is in there?
We're talking this,
Talking about your, what I emailed you regarding vision and goals. I can bring it up as you're thinking about it. Council, and also, not looking to wordsmith tonight, just some ideas that you have that you want to make sure is included, and then we can start putting that into a narrative form. And it might be easier for me to bring up.
So for the purpose of this, we want to stay away from the how and focus on the.
So what we'll do is, once we have your statements, what we'll do as staff is we'll start working on strategies that we'll bring back before you for approval. And that's using you look at our strategic planning tool there for setting smarter goals. They'll be specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, time-based, evaluated, and reviewed. That's how you'll see the the strategies as they come back to you. So in the packets, as you remember, we have the vision, which is we will Auburn will embrace possibilities and create opportunities. And then from there were about 5 goals based on our conversations that led to these statements here. And then from that, on the next page, you'll see where we talked about those 5, bringing in those goal statements that are already there, and then moving that forward. And if you'd like, well, one thing we can do is we can have staff, based off from initiatives that they're working on, from their boards, committees, and work that you've provided, start filling some of this in and bring that back to you with other added elements, if that's something you're interested in as well. So we could have staff do that, bring it back before you, you'll get a chance to review it, Everything will go back for you to review and say, yeah, this is on track. When we're talking about enriching neighborhood identities, and when you think about enriching neighborhood identities, that's about, if you remember back in the retreat, where you're talking about the fact that one thing about Auburn is that it is a tapestry of neighborhoods, right? I think that's one of the comments that were used when you were discussing that. So that's what brought that in, is how do we enrich the neighborhood identity? What does that look like for us? There was a component within the strategic plan that identified that, so that statement was brought into this goal.
Phil, on the reclaiming our streets goal,
Yep.
I do like the language that's there, but I want to make sure that we're cognizant that, reclaiming our streets is definitely something we want to focus on in the downtown, but there's opportunities elsewhere as well.
So in other words, would an acceptable edit be develop clear identities for Auburn? Residential and industrial parks?
Well, we can certainly have staff work on that to say, what are some of those opportunities outside of the downtown that we want to make sure that our streets are being focused on? Some of that might be our street reconstruction, right? And the work that's done within our street reconstruction, what does that look like? How do we expand walkability within our parks areas, those types of things? So that could be some of that walkability outside of our downtown. Dave's here, so I want to mention too, Dave Griswold is part of our forestry. Well, we need to be looking also, when we talk about reclaiming our streets, how are we reclaiming our streets as it pertains to our tree inventory that's along our streets? What does that look like? I think the work that they did on Washington Ave is a good example of outside of the downtown initiative that took place that planted trees where they needed to be, and is really going to change that gateway in the future as you come in. What more can we be doing along those lines? So we could certainly add something along that. Counselor Staples, if that's what you're referring to, we could build on that.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So we can see what you're looking at on your screen. And I passed your, did you pass up to?
I think the city council has been working a lot regarding making housing more attainable.
I've got it right here.
What we'll do here is that there is an initiative at the state level regarding this, looking at the plan that the state came up with. We can look at some of those initiatives because it's really important for our goals, not just to align with the strategic plan, but also align with what the state's plans are. Because when we go and apply for funding, it's nice to be able to demonstrate, here's our document. This is what, when we're applying for this grant, here's our document. You'll see that our goals are aligning with this initiative that you're taking place at the state level. Much like what we talked about earlier with sustainability, with the resolve that was passed, and the importance for us to make sure that resolve is aligning with the state's plan. We can incorporate that in as well. There's nothing else, then I think I'm okay. We're going to take some of those pieces. We'll beef up some of these, and then that'll give you a chance. We'll put it in an order form, so that way that you're able to actually make some motions, edits, and do that right at the council meeting level, and then we'll be able to get this packaged up. And again, like I said, staff will then take this and then start creating the strategies.
And once this is created, what's the, where does it live? How is it used?
Yeah, great question. It will be used in our strategic plan implementation and then used within our budgeting process. So that's where you'll see that, also within programming. So as we're working through programming, as we're looking at new programs, how do they align with the council goals? If they're not aligning within this goal, then we really need to step back and say, is this an initiative we should be moving forward with? Doesn't mean that it doesn't, we don't, but there should be some scoring mechanism to say, all right, this just doesn't align here. Maybe it's a priority, but it's not a priority at this level. And that might be something we circle back and say, okay, here's something that we may not have included in a goal, might be something we need to make a modification to this. Nothing holds it, it's a guideline. Nothing is gonna restrict something from happening or restrict you from putting initiative forward in the budget. None of that will happen. This is just our roadmap. And it's very helpful as we're applying for grants. If we're looking at some of our economic tourism type grants, we've got to be able to demonstrate we have a vision, we have goals, and we have strategies to meet that. Okay? All right.
Okay. We have another 14 minutes left in workshop. We're going to add a topic right now which dovetails directly off of the city manager was talking about with your vision and goals. Now, while your vision and goals have not been completely edited and finalized and formalized or memorialized, they're there. And I don't think anyone's had a problem. You set this right in the beginning of the term. So as mayor, I always look for different policy options, policy initiatives, if you would, to satisfy one or more of your goals as a council. And what I have right now, and you all have a paper copy, I'm going to make sure that the city manager gets a copy out for the record, for the minutes, as well as electronically out to you all and others, a copy of our proposal. I'm going to read it to you. This is the ARPA, wrong one, ARPA Owner Occupied Grant Program. So based on the final rules of ARPA from the Feds, Department of Treasury, and you can use ARPA money to encourage housing options. And one of the goals of the City Council is to increase opportunities for owner-occupied, multi-unit buildings throughout the city, especially in areas that are serviced with public water, sewer, and along existing roadways. While the Planning Board works on zoning changes that are in line with our 2021 comprehensive plan that will increase possibilities for infill construction, I would like to propose the following financial incentives that will accelerate the construction of these units. The name of the program is Auburn's Owner-Occupied Grant Program. Purpose is to encourage construction of owner-occupied units, providing not only a net gain of attainable housing, but also a path for new homeowners to build generational wealth. The budget for this, out of ARPA funds, is approximately $500,000. The goal is the construction of 15 to 25 new duplexes and triplexes throughout our city, primarily in downtown vacant lots. Term is a grant of up to $10,000 per unit for owner-occupied duplexes and triplexes for infrastructure hookup and site preparation. Again, infrastructure hookup, this is kind of a way to encourage further infill by hooking up to existing water and sewer as an allocation, okay, as well as other types of site preparation that might be needed. People who qualify, developers who build units for sale to owner-occupied tenants. Individuals who directly contract with builders for building of owner-occupied buildings, and those who rehabilitate currently condemned properties into owner-occupied units. Obviously, staff actions are going to be determined by city manager. We'd like to have this in front of you for action, i.e. a vote, amendments, ideas, and so forth by the February 14th meeting. Timing's of the essence. So, after I read the nuts and bolts, let me give you the simplified version. This really hits at creating more attainable housing units throughout our city, enriching our neighborhood identities, reclaiming our streets, and enacting resilient solutions. 4 out of your 5 goals. Owner-occupied throughout our city. We know the stats are clear. Owner-occupied has less calls for police, fire, so forth, better maintained, higher quality unit, less problems. And also it's building generational wealth for those who don't have or might not have that opportunity today. Getting people who can become an owner and a landlord and basically run their own small business is creating wealth for themselves, lifting them out of poverty, and also creating wealth for their future generations. Okay? This is the one surest path, fastest path to ending generational poverty that we have. And we finally have a tool, financial tool, to help incentivize that further. A couple other things too. It's very hard to get a construction loan for a 2 or 3 unit building because it's not a commercial entity. Even if you're owner occupied, the cost of construction is obviously higher because it's more square foot. But you have a tenant that's offsetting that, but the banks don't like to look at that revenue stream as an offset, okay, or additional income. And there's a lot of...
Especially if you don't have a record of being a landlord.
Yes. And if you had
If you are someone that has a record as a landlord, they will take into account the rent revenue, but if you don't, they will not.
So this is targeting a couple different things. This is helping lift people out of generational poverty. It's helping with infill. It's putting more people on our infrastructure, which already has fixed costs. So that's my proposal. It's something that looking at and working with the state legislative committee on housing has become very clear that's needed. Talking with people in the industry, from contractors to potential home buyers, it's needed. It seems to be the right path. But I'd like from you, as a workshop, thoughts on this, ideas. And you don't have to be, this isn't the first and only time you can have input in this, of course. If there's anything that comes up after further thought over the course of the next week or so, send an email, make a phone call, talk to the city manager or staff or myself, and let's try to make this the best possible program with the greatest possible reach for the greatest amount of people.
I'm just spitballing here. I don't know how I feel about this, honestly, but we should probably consider whether we want to allow people to double dip on some of these. So whatever we decide, but I think maybe there should be some language there one way or the other.
Agreed. On this version, I'm wondering, there should be another complementary programs. You can utilize this with MISHA, Maine State Housing Authority funds, VA, first-time home buyer, and maybe other city, CDBG, or home funds too, depending upon income stream. So there's a couple different aspects, or a couple different things you can probably leverage. But the devils are always in the details, and I'd like to entrust staff into making rules on this that are fair. They understand the goal. They have the experts on staff to understand how to make this appropriate and compliant. So, but I agree that those are something, and I'd lean on staff to see if that makes sense or not, and then for us to deliberate and vote on.
Just for clarification, can we move that February 14th to 22nd? That'll be your meeting, is the 22nd.
Okay.
We won't make you meet on Valentine's.
Valentine's Day.
You know what? I just need an alibi.
I know that date was on your mind, that's why you'd used it.
Thought it was, but hey, it was on my mind. Yes, thank you. So February is 22nd. Yeah, so we have some time. And there is a rush here. Not a rush. We have some time, but it's all about timing. Now people are lining up contractors. They're looking for land. It matches up with what planning board is doing on our traditional downtown zoning, based upon the 2021 comp plan recommendations. And in certain cases, you got to check for frogs and vernal pool activity, and that can only be done in April, May. So, Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hitting sort of on your generational poverty and stuff, and trying to raise people's quality of living. We are missing the mark on not including revitalizing, doing some sort of grant for those that have lived in our downtown and they've lived in what is being called gently, they're kind of tired housing stock that needs to be revitalized. And if it's revitalized, it will bring up the quality of life of the tenants and the homeowner, property owner. And also, maybe if there's enough land to go with that building, it could also hit your target of maybe they could enlarge what they have. But the first step would be to revitalize the tired housing stock, raise the quality of life, give the tenants something to help work with, to help bring up the appearance of the neighborhood, which will also spin off when we're trying to get others from outside of Auburn to live in Auburn, something to look at, because the whole city is judged as a whole, not just a piecemeal, what we can bring in. It also is judged on what we do have.
So to answer your question, you're absolutely right. This is a targeted policy that fills in a blank that does not exist within our current toolbox. Now, we do have in our current toolbox significant funds from federal government in the form of CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, home funds, as well as a $3.6 million lead abatement grant that we just received. That's a lot of tools that are already in existence to rehabilitate units that need to be rehabilitated. But here's the key to this. You can't rehabilitate a unit if someone's living in a unit. There has to be a place for them to go to. And that goes back to our supply issues with an unoccupancy rate of 0.5%, roughly, 0.5%, or just basically zero unoccupancy. There is no, I can't have 3 tenants, or we can't ask 3 tenants to leave for 6 months during a complete rehabilitation and expect them to have a place to live. So we do have to increase supply. We do already have existing tools in the toolbox to revitalize. If we see any, or if any of you see any holes in that toolbox that need to be filled, present an idea.
Another idea, I'm not sure one way or the other, but potentially, if somebody were to take a single-family home and add a unit, could they be potentially eligible for a $10,000 because they added one unit?
That's not in here. Is it possible? Is it possible as an incentive for an accessory dwelling unit or conversion of an in-law? I'll look at the council. Is it? Is there some appetite for that?
It increases housing stock.
It increases
Yeah.
units.
I mean,
I
that's,
think you
that's the
could-
goal, right, is to increase the units.
You could do the accessory dwelling units. You could also look at like substantial rehab of empty buildings, not necessarily condemned.
Right.
But I drive around and I
Empty.
see these buildings that are vacant. It's like, what is with
Yeah.
this property? What-
Yeah.
So condemned, so the idea here is to increase the net number of housing units. So if it's empty and you're converting to housing units, that's an increase, same as condemned.
That's this goal.
This goal
particular
is
goal,
to increase the quantity,
Yes,
supply.
quantity.
So
I think
ADUs
what-
could
I
qualify.
think what Rick is
Yeah.
saying and what Linda's, what I'm hearing and what I agree with is that along the lines of these targeted incentives, I'll give it an example of something that I'm actually doing, is there a way we can incentivize landlords to sell buildings to people that have been generationally renters to become first-time homeowners, owner occupied in a building where they never owned a home before, they've always rented, but a landlord sells it to them, and we create some sort of an incentive there that makes it good for the landlord, makes it good for the tenant that buys that, and provides some, through CDBG or through something like that, that allows this tenant that's now taking over a tired building to do the necessary work within it to lift the standard of the neighborhood.
So if I could, with time, and not to
Yeah.
change this premise, but with time and working with staff
It
to
doesn't have to
create.
be this one,
No, it'll be another one, yeah, a separate one that is really
I love
converting
the
rentals
ideas.
to owner
I love
occupied.
the ideas.
Owner occupied is the best way to go,
Best.
period. So, agreed? Okay, so that could be a secondary.
And especially if there's an absentee landlord or something like that,
You're
that
taking
we
it
could
away, bringing it in.
incentivize everybody, make it win-win, and get somebody that has never been an owner to take over a building that was an absentee landlord and help them, provide, I know that there's city services, provide people that can advise them on how to maintain your property.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm looking at, glad that we
Yeah.
can, we'll make that happen.
That's
We'll
a-
see if we can
yeah.
type up a memo of understanding at least for the
Yeah.
next meeting on that, okay?
Landlord training, home ownership training, that kind of stuff that Glenn's very familiar with.
Yeah.
It'd be very easy for staff to work on.
Because that's gonna be enrich the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is there any other ideas on this? If there's no other ideas, then I think we got some marching orders for staff. We've got this. We also have the one we just talked about with Steve. Now, 30 seconds before we go in next door to our meeting. The mayor, me, I had an ad hoc committee on ARPA funds. What I'd like to get away from is having that meeting now, because we did all the heavy lifting before this term started, meeting for the next couple months. If there's ideas from the council prerogatives based upon your goals, let's work them out. Let's bring them up. Let's talk about it. When we start getting third-party requests for capital, I'm going to reconvene that committee to start looking at and triaging outside requests, similar to Museum LA, before they come into council for look, okay? And just really make sure we understand that and start prioritizing if need be. But that won't be for the next couple months. Fair enough? Okay? Okay, so we're out of workshop now. Thank you all very much. We'll go next door and convene for a regular council meeting. Good evening. I'll now call to order this meeting of January 18th, 2022. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, first on the agenda tonight, we have 10 consent items. I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor?
I have a motion, Councilor Milks. Do I have a second? I'm sorry, do I have a second? Was that Councilor Gary?
No, we're looking to pull three of the items out of the consent agenda.
Okay. What are those
Three-
items?
The three planning board recommendations.
Okay, those will be pulled off the consent agenda, consent agenda and put under new business in the order in which they are received. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the 7 consent agenda items on tonight's agenda.
So moved.
I'm sorry,
Second.
who made the initial motion? Councilor Staples. It'll take me a couple of years to recognize your voices. Okay, Councilor Staples, do I have a second again?
Second.
Second for Councilor Gary. Show of hands, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstain? None being, passes 7-0. Okay, next are the minutes of the January 3rd, 2022 regular city council meeting. Are there any corrections? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the January 3rd, 2022 regular city council meeting.
Motion to approve.
And a motion from Councilor Walker, second from Councilor Staples. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously, 7-0. Next, communications. First on communications from the Agricultural Committee, I'll ask Chairwoman Kathy Shaw if she could please step forward and let us know what she's presented.
Good evening. I'm Kathy Shaw from 1200 Soapers Mill Road, Valley View Farm in Auburn. I am presenting to you tonight our annual report for you to take a look at. And also, we completed the document for the Agricultural Committee Emergency Executive Order that was issued January 18, 2021. I sent everybody copies of these letters and these documents earlier today, twice, to Mr. Moore, and I apologize for that. I'm not a computer person at all. I'd be glad to talk about what we've been going on this year. I would like to take a moment for you folks to recognize that there are 4 members of the Ag Committee here, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus myself. We've all been working very hard this year to create a vision and a face for agriculture and forestry in the city of Auburn.
Thank you very much. I'm sure it's in the agenda, it'll be in the minutes as well, so we can review it. Thank you
Are there
very
any
much.
questions?
Thank you very much. Next, budget, we're going to cancel the budget portal presentation due to technical difficulty. We're going to go right into police overview. Chief Mullen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Thank you for having me tonight. And we're here to talk about just a department overview of the PD for some of the new counselors that have joined us, and just to kind of give you a preview of everything that's going on here at the PD. So when we look at Auburn Police Department, we have our mission to prevent crime and protect our community, and our vision is to be very community-focused in everything that we do. Community policing is one of our top priorities, and we want to make sure that we continue that good community partnership that we currently value. Our core values: honor, excellence, loyalty, and professionalism. Those are the 4 cornerstones of our agency, and we run our daily operations according to those 4 cornerstones. And our motto, expect excellence. You see that on the back of every cruiser that we have, and That's a motto that we live up to every day. When you look at the department, we are divided into 4 divisions. The administration division of myself, the deputy chief, our executive assistant, and our professional standards sergeant. We're tasked with overseeing the overall operations of the agency. Our professional standards sergeant also serves as our training coordinator, overseeing all of our training efforts, and also oversees our recruitment efforts, selection processes, and internal affairs. The patrol division is our mainstay. It's the largest division that we have, and we are at full staff. We have 2 lieutenants, 8 sergeants, and 24 patrol officers that work a 3-on, 3-off, 11-hour schedule, and they are answering approximately 26,000 calls of service every year. Our criminal investigations division is responsible for all of our major crime and felony investigations, and also our school resource officers overseeing our youth services, child protective services, and also our liaisons with our federal agencies. At full staff, we are comprised of lieutenant, a sergeant, 5 detectives, 3 school resource officers, and the property evidence coordinator. And our support services division is responsible for the overall support of the department. This includes vehicle maintenance, equipment maintenance, oversees our volunteers and police services, parking enforcement, control, and Project Lifesaver. And when we are fully staffed, this division is comprised of a lieutenant, a sergeant, 3 drug enforcement agents, 2 assigned to Maine Drug, and 1 assigned to the federal DEA HIDTA task force, 1 traffic enforcement officer, our special enforcement officer that oversees the animal control responsibilities as well, our parking enforcement officer, our court officer, and records information assistant. You'll see here, this is just an organizational chart of our current status within the agency. You can see the divisions broken out and who is assigned where within that agency. Staffing. I'm going to open this by saying, folks, we're tired. Our staff has been working hard throughout this pandemic. We're starting year 3 of a 2-week flatten the curve, and our staff is tired. They've been working diligently and also answering the calls of service, but also that fear of bringing COVID home to the family, being exposed to work. We have strict protocols in place for when to use their personal protective equipment that they've been issued to try to minimize that contact and that exposure. In the last year, we've had 7 officers leave the agency. 4 have gone to sheriff's departments throughout the state, 3 to Androscoggin SO, and 1 to York SO. 2 of our officers went to other smaller municipalities as direct hires, as supervisors for those smaller agencies. And then we had 1 that quit after 2 days at the Criminal Justice Academy, realized that they wouldn't be able to complete the 18 weeks and reconsidered their career choice. And we had 3 new hires in 2021. We were able to hire 1 certified officer from a smaller agency. We hired 1 officer at the beginning of 2021 who just completed the academy and graduated in December. We had a swearing-in ceremony 2 weeks ago, Officer Rosignol, and he's currently in field training. And he'll be clearing his field training in about 3 weeks, and that will put him on the road, filling one of our open slots. We currently have 1 hire that's currently waiting to attend the academy. We have him doing data entry work and anything else that we need throughout the agency. We currently have 4 vacancies within the agency. We have 4 officers that are out on extended medical leaves for various reasons. So that leaves us with 10 open slots currently on our organizational table. So 18.5% of our sworn complement is open right now. We are battling COVID-19 issues as well. We've had 20 employees, which is now 23 employees as of 5 o'clock this afternoon, that have tested positive, resulting in 10-day quarantines. And we've had approximately 50 close contacts with our staff that's resulted in some various degrees of isolation. We are following CDC guidelines. Matt Fifield, the Deputy Fire Chief, who's our city safety officer, has been working diligently with us to ensure that we are following those guidelines. We look at minimum staffing issues, and as you can see here, we get pretty bare bones throughout the day. From 8 a.m. to 4 a.m. is 4 officers and 1 supervisor. That's 4 officers and 1 supervisor covering 68 square miles of this city. From 9 p.m. to 2 a.m., our minimum staffing used to be 5, but we had to reduce that to 4 because of our current vacancies and to reduce the workload on staff. So we've left that 5th slot open. If somebody wants to sign up for it and work, it's optional. It's an optional shift. They're not being forced to work it. And from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., we have 3 officers and 1 supervisor. And I'll show you our staffing model. It relates to our calls for service, and we try to staff for those peaks and valleys in our calls for service throughout the day. Our officers have been drafted to work, meaning they've been forced to either hold over for a shift, come in for a shift, or being forced in on a day off to work. They've been drafted 127 times since July 11th. So given our vacancies, given our staffing issues we're having directly related to COVID-19, it's put a serious strain on our agency. With that, we've also had staff reductions since 2019. We've lost a full-time information assistant. We've lost a full-time administrative assistant, a part-time parking information assistant, and we had 1 traffic officer position that was frozen in the 2019 budget. So we've lost 3.5 full-time positions. Our workload hasn't changed. Our officers are more busy now than they ever have been, and what we're finding is now our officers are having to spend more time in the station because when we take a report or we process an arrest, there's a lot of things that go into that. There are witness statements that need to be scanned into the system and attached to the reports. Any form that's generated has to be scanned in and attached within our records management system so it can then be uploaded to the district attorney's office. That one full-time information assistant that we lost was responsible for that. So now we have officers spending more time in the station doing data entry things when we need to have them out on the road. Our staffing challenges, if you look at the last 5 years, we've had 27 officers leave the agency. We've lost 7 to retirements. We've lost 10 to other agencies. And we've had 6 that just quit the career and went to the private sector. And we've had 4 that have resigned in lieu of termination. And typically that happens during field training where they realize they're not going to be able to clear their field training program. They're not performing to our standards that we expect. And they decide to leave before they're terminated prior to the end of their field training. And we had 1 officer that resigned from the academy in lieu of termination due to an integrity issue. Some of the challenges we're having with recruitment is competitive wages. The smaller towns are really increasing their wages exponentially, where before we used to get officers from smaller agencies that came to us for more opportunities, more experience, better pay. We're now seeing officers leave to go to other agencies, smaller agencies, because that pay has increased. These smaller towns are really stepping up their game with their recruitment and their pay scales to try to garner those certified officers. The Maine Criminal Justice Academy has changed their selection process for the training program for the academy. Whereas before we had what we call John Doe slots, where we could call the academy, reserve a slot for an upcoming academy, hire somebody 2 to 4 weeks prior to the start of the academy. They go to the academy, they graduate, come back to us. The academy has eliminated those John Doe slots, and they're going directly by date of hire. So I have to hire somebody, get them in place on payroll before they're even eligible to go to the academy. And based on the waiting list due to COVID-19 backlog issues that they've had, we have officers that are going to spend almost a year on payroll before they go to the academy. We had an officer that I hired in October. I did not make the entrance for the January academy, so he won't go to the academy until August. And this is an unfunded mandate by the state. We're having to hire these people so we can get them down on paper as being employed before they even considered to be going to the academy. And then the academy only takes 85 people, of which they'll take 70 with a 15-person standby list. So hopefully our officer that we have waiting will get into the August academy. Plus, if we have 4 vacancies, if we hire 4 officers with no experience that have to go to the academy, that's going to push that wait out even longer. And our applicant pool is shrinking, coupled with the negative view of law enforcement within the society now. We don't have a lot of people applying for this job anymore. And also another critical piece is our lack of housing for non-local candidates, where they may want to come to work at Auburn, however, there's no housing readily available. And it's tough to find decent housing stock within the city, and some of the challenges that present with that. And also another challenge that we have is, we're looking at 7 potential retirements within 5 years. So we've got 7 officers that'll be hitting either their 25-year and not opting into the drop program, or they're ending the drop program and they're leaving after their 6 years in the drop. So potentially we have those officers that are hitting that 31-year mark where they have to separate from the agency as part of the drop program.
Chief, most of the council may not be aware of the drop program.
So what the drop program is an officer can retire in place after 25 years. With Maine State Retirement, we have a 25 2/3 retirement plan, where at 25 years, officers can get 66% of their best 3 years. What we did approximately 8 or 9 years ago, was we created a drop program that was modeled after the state of Florida, where officers that have hit that 25 years, they can retire in place and stay with the agency for another 5 years while collecting their pension. And typically, most officers will take that pension, roll it into a 457 or some other type of retirement plan. So at the end of the 5 years, when they fully separate, they've got that second retirement to kind of help assist them with their Maine State retirement. So they're allowed to stay an additional 5 years, and there's an optional 1 year after that. But if they stay for that extra year, at the end of those 6 years, they must separate from the department. And kind of a statistical snapshot from the last 5 years, we're currently, in 2021, we had 26,413 calls of service, down slightly from 2020, but increase from the previous 4 years before that. One of the issues that we're seeing with our calls of service is our mental health calls. Our mental health calls are increasing every year, and coupled with that comes a higher degree of de-escalation that's required for those type of calls. So, a call where we had one officer go to assist somebody that might be experiencing a mental health crisis, that's now taking 2, maybe 3 officers per call to be able to de-escalate that situation effectively. And with 54 group homes in the city, we've seen a direct correlation with the number of mental health calls that we're dealing with, because these group homes, they get a resident that's out of control, and their staff can't handle them. They're calling us to de-escalate the situation and resolve it peacefully. And we have some residents that are a 3-officer call minimum, that they've been flagged as a 3-officer call, just because of the violence that's associated with that individual based on their mental health crisis. So that's our biggest driver, is our mental health calls are really increasing. In 2021, we had 555 mental health calls. That's almost 2 a day. Of those 555, it took 468 staff hours to be able to mitigate those calls. So we're spending an inordinate amount of time per officer, per call, dealing with these types of calls. You look at our uniform crime rate. Our crime rate has dropped significantly over the last 5 years. We saw a large increase from 2018 to 2019. Most of that was attributed to our anti-shoplifting campaign that we conducted, and we've been able to sustain that decrease in the crime rate for the last 2 years. One of the most figures that I'm most proud of is our clearance rate. And when you look at this clearance rate for an agency this size, it's one of the highest clearance rates in the state. whereas we are solving 49.5% of all of our crime, down from 61% from 2 years ago. However, when you have a drop in crime rate, you can have a drop in the clearance rate because you're not solving as many crimes. So we are solving just about 50% of all the crime committed here in the Auburn. That is a testament to our staff and their dedication and all the effort and quality work that they put into clearing these cases. We currently have 6 neighborhood watch groups. When we're not in a pandemic, we've had to suspend our meetings just because of risk and whatnot. But we have 6 located throughout the city. We have a lieutenant or a sergeant assigned to each one of those groups to act as a liaison. And what we do is we try to get those folks going, and then we'll kind of pull back a little bit and let them meet on their own, and then we'll come in and give them any assistance or any liaison that they may need with the agency regarding issues in their neighborhood. I'll open for any questions, if you folks have any questions.
Just looking at your data from a couple of slides ago, you had a significant drop in the number of citations from 2018 to 2019. It was almost half. It was more than half. What do you think led to that?
Well, one our staffing, and also when we lost our traffic enforcement officer, that traffic enforcement officer was sole responsibility was traffic enforcement, and without having that officer there, that falls to their officers that are working in assigned districts, and when they are coupled with their calls for service, they have to take care of that call for service in their spare time, do traffic enforcement. When you look at our calls of service count by hour and source, this middle line is our true calls for service. These are the non-initiated calls for service. These are the ones that are coming in through 911. And the bottom line, the light blue line, is our officer-initiated calls for service. Those are our traffic stops, our field interviews, our community contacts, anything that's initiated by the officer. That, and the top line is our overall calls to service. And you can see our calls to service really start to increase about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And they increase throughout the day till about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and then they start to drop off. When you see those calls to service dropping off, that's when you see the officer-initiated calls for service increase, because they're not as busy responding to 911 calls. That allows them the opportunity for some proactive police work. So when we staff our staffing model, we try to adjust for these spikes in the call volume. And you can see where from 7 to 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock is really our highest spike, and we try to staff appropriately for those spikes. And we are consistent through our calls of service on the days of the week. From Tuesday to Friday, we're fairly steady. There's a slight drop on Saturday and Sunday, but by Monday they're picking back up again. But also when you give them the weekends, especially during the summertime, whereas Friday and Saturday nights, you're getting into those more severe type of calls that there's more violence associated with those type of calls. Intoxication plays a big part into that. And so those are the disorderlies, the disturbances that are alcohol fueled. Those raise our use of force statistics as well. So coupled with that, we have those 2 or 3 officers responding to each of those disturbance calls as well to help try to de-escalate that as well. So the drop in citations, Counselor, is we can attribute that one to the loss of that traffic enforcement officer, but also as our calls of service increase, that time for self-initiated proactivity decreases.
Any other questions for Chief? Okay. Thank you very much, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
May I get a copy of your presentation?
Yes.
Thank you kindly.
And just real quick question, just this came up today. You have to register your vehicle every year, correct?
Correct.
And if you move here from out of state, you have how many days to register your vehicle?
You have 30 days.
30 days upon movement to Maine. Thank you very much, Chief. That clarification. Chief Chase, next on the agenda for communications is Fire and EMS.
Yeah, right.
Take it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Similar to Chief Moen, just here to do a little orientation for you and
a little bit more detailed dive into our EMS service as well. The mission of the Auburn Fire Department is to provide the community with a higher standard of service through prevention, training, education, suppression, and emergency medical services. We will provide this service with loyalty, integrity, accountability, and teamwork. We really pride ourselves on having kind of a three-phase approach to fire protection. First being fire prevention, the second being response, and the third being recovery. So how do we facilitate our community recovering from disasters or fire incidents? This is our organizational structure. Our administrative team is made up of myself and the deputy chief. We have an executive assistant. And then we have a fire prevention officer. The fire prevention division is primarily responsible for enforcement of the fire and life safety codes, plans review with regard to fire and life safety codes. He coordinates our public education for children during Fire Prevention Week, open houses, general safety. We're actually working on some programs and getting into some of our larger housing complexes in the city, working with Auburn Housing Authority and stuff to do some education with elder populations and their specific safety needs. And then we have an EMS coordinator that is the primary administrative coordinator for EMS, which is, as you'll see when we get into our statistics a little bit later, is a pretty substantial portion of our business and warrants some dedicated resources for the administration of that. From a response standpoint, the staff of 64 is broken out into 4 platoons. They work a 24-hour shift on and 3 days off, so it's 1 day on, 3 days off, 24-hour shifts. Those platoons have 16 individuals assigned to them. Each platoon has 16 individuals. And our minimum staffing for those platoons is 14, and you'll see that on this next slide, and I'll explain that. So at some point we lost a graphic here which showed that we're broken into 3 response zones throughout the city. Out of Central Station houses the administrative staff, of course, and then we have our battalion chiefs who's in the command unit. We have an engine which is staffed with 3 or 4 firefighters, and a rescue, an ambulance, which is staffed with 2 firefighter paramedics. They play dual roles, both in paramedicine and in responding to fires. Up at Center Street, we have a truck 1, that is a quint. A quint is a combination apparatus that is both a pumper and an aerial ladder truck, so it plays dual role. That is staffed with 3 or 4 firefighters, and we have our second ambulance up there, staffed with 2 paramedic firefighters. And at South Main Street in New Auburn, we have Engine 2, which is staffed with 3 firefighters. So our minimum staffing, in order to keep 2 engines, the quint, and 2 rescues, and a command unit in operation is 14. As I said earlier, each platoon is assigned 16 individuals. What that basically allows us to do is when anyone is on vacation, or we have vacation or sick time or other holiday usage, 2 individuals can be out before we incur any overtime. But we never fall below that 14-man minimum staffing, and should an occurrence happen where more than 2 individuals are out, we then incur overtime. I would also say that all of this is if we are fully staffed, and as I'll get into a little bit later, we have similar staffing challenges as to Chief Moen. Oh, and there's our graphic of our 3 districts and how we're broken out.
Chief, can you just explain to the council too and the public that minimum staffing is based on apparatus and not a total minimum staffing?
That's right. So contractually, the contract requires that for the fire engine or the ladder truck, if we're going to staff that apparatus, it must have at least 3 firefighters on it. It's a firefighter safety-driven initiative to be sure that you have sufficient staff to be able to do the operations that they'd be required to on the fire ground. Similarly, an ambulance by contract is required to be staffed by 2. So as the city manager was saying, that doesn't say that we have to have 14 people, but in reducing that number below 14, it would mean taking an apparatus out of service in order to be able to reduce below the 14. Any questions on that? We really are an all-hazards response department. From a fire perspective, we certainly have to be responsible for structural fires, but we do a fair number of wild and agricultural fires, vehicle fires, and we have to be prepared and have have had several responses to chemical or natural gas or propane fires as well. We also have the need for special rescue. We have equipment and training for for water and ice rescue, rope rescues, confined space rescues, which might be in a manhole or a pumping station or some kind of industrial facility in a tank. So we have training and equipment to be able to perform those rescues. Trench rescues, should somebody become compromised in a ditch or whatever the case might be, structural collapse, those types of all hazards. Above and beyond, we additionally do, as we said, EMS services, emergency medical services. We have to be prepared to respond to transportation emergencies, hazardous materials releases that can be generated either from traffic-related incidents or our industrial facilities. We have to be prepared for aviation-related emergencies, utility hazards. One thing that has certainly changed as the fire service has progressed is we really have become kind of the go-to agency. When anybody has any hiccup in their home or whatever emergency it might be, they're dialing 911 and expecting police or fire to address that issue for them. That independent spirit, if you will, there's certainly a lot more emphasis on calling 911 and trying to have them help you mitigate your emergency. And we respond to a lot of emergencies, all hazards, and we have to be prepared for all of those things. This is a breakdown of our incidents and our responses for the 2021 calendar year. We responded to 5,790 calls for service. That is a record high number of responses. As is always the case, a full 80% of those are rescue and emergency medical services calls. We'll get into a little bit more detail of that 4,796 rescue and EMS calls. We'll talk about the detail of the EMS specific, but other rescue calls would be those water rescues. Motor vehicle accidents are considered rescue calls if we have to do extrication and those types of things. So that rescue category of 82% is encompassing of motor vehicle accidents in our EMS calls. Fires are comprised of structure fires, wildland fires, vehicle fires. It's a general big bucket, but I have lots of detail I could provide you if you'd like more detail on that. But as you can see, there's no doubt that it's certainly a big driver of our calls for service is rescue and EMS. A little bit of a historical trend. Since 2017, we've seen a 23% increase in our calls for service. It had been trending. 2021, we expect would have been much higher, but believe it or not, at the first few months of COVID, we actually saw a dip in calls for service. People really hunkered down. So transportation went down, businesses had closed, that cut down on traffic into the city, but it also cut down on medical calls. So 2020 would have been higher, but 2021 has been a record year for us. Again, historically, 80% of those are rescue and EMS calls. It's slightly higher in 2021, primarily driven by COVID. Some of the organizational strains, or challenges, I should say, is staff strain. As Chief Moen expressed, and it's probably the most concise way for me to express it, staff is tired. They're tired from increased call volume, increased demands and strain on calls. 2.5 years ago, when we went out to almost all of our EMS calls, we donned nitrile protective gloves and went and treated the patient. Today, for those same calls and virtually all of the EMS calls that we do, we have to have on eye protection, a full surgical gown, N95 respirator, and those gloves. And that really does add strain. It's both the strain of taking that on and off, but it's also having to communicate through it, not being face-to-face with your patient. It's hot, it's sweaty. There's a lot more strains with that. But above and beyond that is that's always a constant reminder that there's that risk that you're going to get sick or get COVID and bring it home to your family, and that causes a lot of stress in the staff. COVID has certainly reduced our opportunity to train, bring people in together. Everything we do in firefighting is done in a team. We have very few individual efforts, and we have been really reluctant to bring groups together to do those multi-company trainings because of COVID. And believe it or not, training with a crew is a big morale builder. That's what they're in for. They got into this profession for those types of skills. And we haven't had a lot of opportunity to do those because of COVID. Forced overtime because of illness, quarantines, and vacancies is a big driver of strain in the organization. We've had around between 90 and 100 forced overtime shifts. Historically, if we had one or two instances a year in which we would have to force somebody for overtime, that was the norm. And this year, we're closer to 100 forced shifts. And be mindful, when we're forcing somebody, typically they've already worked a 24-hour shift and we're asking them to work a second 24-hour shift immediately following that. So it's typically 48 hours straight, sometimes 72. All of these challenges have certainly led to challenges with recruitment and retention. We also had 10% turnover last year. We lost 7 of our response staff in the last year. I was trying to think as Chief Mullen was giving his statistics, but 2 of those, I'm only aware of 2 of those individuals that left our organization to stay in EMS. One went to a smaller department for more money, and one went into EMS education rather than EMS patient care. We had one individual that, in the midst of COVID and the vaccine mandate, decided EMS wasn't for him at all and left. He had only been with us a short time. And then we had 4 individuals that retired, and they were all discretionary, meaning they were in the drop program, or they could have joined the drop program, as Chief Mullen explained it, but chose not to. So some of them had just entered the drop program before COVID, but decided they weren't going to stay for that extra 5 years and opted to leave in the midst of that. So, the strains and the challenges have really been real. And it's not just with Auburn, it's really industry-wide. COVID strains have been driving people from EMS. We're actually, some of those individuals that retired from us took some private sector jobs. And in general, we're seeing a lot of departments offering sign-on incentives or bonuses or other types of incentives to lure any licensed EMS providers toward them. I'll get a little bit more deep dive with regard to EMS. We talked about some of those strains, but more detailed EMS statistics, we responded to 4,409 EMS calls for service. That resulted in 3,411 patient transports. That was a 16.6% increase from 2020. So that certainly added to the strain and stress on the organization. Those crews have really been beat up, coupled with all of that extra PPE and those other stressors. Our EMS revenue for fiscal year 21, we had budgeted $1.2 million. We fell just short of that. We're at $1.179 million. But so far this year in 22, 6 months into FY22, we've already collected $740,000. And I think Finance Director Eastman has said to you a few times in her financial reports that EMS revenues were ahead of projections. And that's a result of the increased call volume. So, we are likely to exceed or we're probably likely to be close to $1.4 or $1.5 million in EMS revenue this year, and we budgeted for 1.2. Again, really driven by the EMS call volume. I'll speak a little bit about EMS billing and how that transpires. What happens, it's important to note that we can only bill a patient if we physically transport them. So we do a lot of EMS calls for service in which we go, we evaluate the patient. Sometimes, it might be a blood sugar issue, and we can do something as simple as be able to, give them some orange juice and stay with them and make sure they're stable. But if we don't physically put them in the ambulance and bring them to the hospital, we can't bill for that service, even if that took us 45 minutes. We're happy to do it as part of the service we do. But we bill for EMS transports. The way that works is when we deliver a patient to the hospital will give us a demographic sheet back, which includes the patient's address and their insurance information. We have a company that pulls our patient information automatically and the insurance information, and will bill the insurance and the patient for that EMS call. So far this year, 92% of the EMS revenue that we've collected has come from insurances or Medicare, Medicaid. 8% of our patient revenue that we've collected has come from patients. We call it patient self-pay. That's either somebody that was uninsured, or more often it's somebody that has a co-pay or a deductible that hasn't been met in their insurance, and they're left with that self-pay bill. So insurance companies are billed, the patients are billed. Patients are given several months to pay those bills. There is the opportunity for patients that have financial hardship to petition for a financial hardship waiver with the finance department and Jill, should that be needed. And then if there's no payment, we do have a collections process where we'll send for someone to collections for payment of those. Continuing on with some of our strengths, we really do continue to be a resilient organization in the face of COVID. The staff has done an unreal job in their fortitude and sticking with it and working hard and working those shifts. But more importantly, their compliance with the changing protocols. It seemed like for the first year of this, every couple of weeks, we were having to give them new state guidance on how to protect themselves, or we have medical procedures and different ways that they had to do medical procedures to reduce their risk of COVID. And they really have done, I can't speak highly enough about the job they've done in trying to be voluntarily compliant with all of that, keep themselves safe and keep their patients safe, and they really have done a wonderful job with that. That's kept us incredibly resilient. The other thing that keeps us very resilient, and more resilient than some potential other EMS agencies, is the sheer size of our organization. Standalone EMS agencies would have an appropriate number of employees just for EMS care, and should they have a COVID outbreak or a bunch of quarantines, that really affects our ability to do EMS care. We're fortunate in that all of our employees play a dual role as firefighters and EMS providers. So if we have some EMS providers that are affected with a COVID incident, we have firefighter employees that, through overtime or whatever, but they can fill that and continue to meet that need, and that keeps us really resilient. We have a large organization because we're a dual role, for just 2 ambulances, we're able to pull people and shuffle them around from fire apparatus. So our resiliency comes in the fact that we're dual role and multi-trained and trained in multiple facets of response. More strengths, we have a continued investment in training and equipment with regard to EMS. We hosted the Zoll cardiac arrest management training. Zoll is a provider of certain cardiac monitors that we use in providing EMS service, and they actually came to the department and trained all of our staff on certain techniques, how to get better results. They actually measured how we do CPR, for example, and gave us real-time feedback on how to tweak that and get better at the details of it, right? Because the details make a difference. We, through capital expenditure last year, invested in Lucas mechanical CPR compression devices. These are devices that you strap on a chest, and they give you real consistent, the right rhythm, the right depth, the right beat for compressions, without the physical strain of somebody having to do that for 20 minutes straight and getting fatigued and being less effective. And we're conducting a field trial on new cardiac monitors that actually tell you whether or not you're compressing at the right depth and the right rate, and tell you to go a little bit deeper or whatever it might be. It's real-time feedback. And these investments really do show results. These investments in staff training and equipment, but also the fact that we respond to those cardiac arrest emergencies in a very heavy way, in compliance with American Heart Association standards. So if we get a cardiac arrest call, we're going to send an ambulance, but we're going to send an engine crew with it. And American Heart Association standards recommend 6 people to run a code, and that's why we're sending those. So between that deployment model and the capital investments and the training that we've done, our statistics for 2021 was of 21 resuscitation attempts. We achieved the return of spontaneous circulation on 13 of them. And those are really, really high standards and high statistics, both for the state and for the nation. So we really do perform very highly with regard to cardiac arrests in this city because of our deployment model and the investments that we make in training and equipment. EMS challenges. There really is a system-wide strain, and it really originates at the hospitals. There's an increased number of patients in the hospitals and reduced staffing. Hospitals are unable to move a lot of patients out of the emergency rooms and up to the floors. And they're also even unable to move patients from the floors back to nursing homes and things because of staffing and patient quotas. So what that's leading to is a lot of hospitals diverting EMS, asking us not to go to their emergency room and transport patients further to other hospitals. It's leading to long patient offload times, the inability for us to quickly bring the patient from our ambulance and get them checked in at the hospital. and get back into service to run to the next EMS call. Sometimes those are becoming 30 and 45 minutes for us to make a transfer of patient care to the hospital. That's 30 or 45 minutes where that ambulance isn't back in service to go on the next EMS call. And it's also resulting in a lot more hospital transfers. Again, this is a system-wide look, and we're not doing hospital transfers, but our partners, our mutual aid partners all around us are. And when they're getting zapped with a lot of hospital transfers, that's really leaving them at a detriment for having available units to run their 911 calls. That trickles down to the EMS service and our strain. We have staffing issues because of COVID as well. We have the increased demand, the high patient acuity, very sick patients, and that's resulting in a lot of strain for us. We get a lot of questions, and something that we monitor and it's worth talking about is how often we go to Lewiston for EMS calls. So here are some statistics, and we get this question enough, but it's also it's important enough for us to monitor that we actually started a system in the fall to, in a very detailed way, track where our ambulances are going town by town and how often those towns come to help us. It had been a really one-sided data point before, so we've started this. And in 2021, we went to Lewiston for EMS calls 249 times. Again, that caused us to establish a system to track it. As you can see, what's really important to us with regard to this mutual aid concept is that there's some parity, right? The best situation, and we mean that we're most appropriately scaled, is even if we went to Lewiston 50 times, if United had to come to Auburn 50 times or 48 times or 52 times, right, there was some level of parity. That would mean that we have really good, in the system, we have really good surge capability, right? Patients coming in and dialing 911 isn't linear. We don't always know when they're going to call. We always end up with these peaks and valleys. And oftentimes, we'll have 2 ambulances out on a call and get a third call in Auburn. United has to cover that. Similarly, the same thing can happen in Lewiston, and Auburn needs to cover that. So as long as there's parity, it means that we've balanced mutual aid pretty well. Yes, sir.
Chief, can you just explain, you've used Lewiston and United interchangeably. Can you explain
Sure.
how the system works?
Yeah, thank you. So United Ambulance Service is the private ambulance service that is providing ambulance coverage for the city of Lewiston, as well as Greene, Minot, Leeds, some other communities. They are the 911 primary response ambulance service for those communities. So in our data, what we found is, in September and October, there was some level of parity between us going to Lewiston and United coming here. November was a really bad month, but we weren't unaware of it. We contact and we talk with United on a regular basis, and they had several crews down with COVID. And they don't have the resiliency that we do. And so that was really biased. And that month actually triggered us to put some things in place that we'll talk about a little bit later. December became much more parity. So far, in the 4 months we've been tracking that, you can see that it is lopsided to some extent. We certainly are going in support of United and Lewiston more than they're coming to Auburn. January looks much more balanced so far as well. Here's the reason I think that we need to watch it very closely is, again, we have a lot of resiliency in our department. If another department doesn't and we can't build parity, then I think we need to make sure that we're ringing those bells and asking for fairness from them. And that's why we need to monitor this data, why we need to watch it really close. Some of the things that we've done, we started communication with United. We talked with them at least twice a week. This gave us the ability to be able to give them feedback and know if they were going to have staffing issues, but it allowed us, if you will, to offer some suggestions and ways that they could solve some of their own problems. Some of what they did is they've actually been bringing Buckfield and Lisbon in to Lewiston to cover some of their calls, taking the strain off of us. Again, but there's strain in the whole system. That's just somebody else's community that's being strained in a different way, but it is spreading that load out a little bit more. On a weekly basis, I have a meeting with all of the EMS chiefs. It's coordinated by Tri-County EMS, but all of the EMS chiefs for Oxford, Androscoggin, and Cumberland County meet to talk about these very issues. Hey, we're having an issue. We're seeing this hospital have to transport patients out, those types of things. We have at times staffed our third ambulance Sometimes it's been generated by feedback from United that their staffing levels were low. Often it's been generated by the fact that we've had hospitals on diversion. So we know when our ambulances transport, we might not just be able to go across the river and drop them off. We might have to go to Brunswick or something, or to Maine Med. That's going to take our ambulance out of the city for an hour. We've had times where we've wanted to staff a third ambulance for that. Other aspects would be long hospital wait times or weather coming in where our transports go down. So we'll continue to monitor this United and Lewiston situation very closely. I think it's important that we continue to express to both Lewiston and United that we are mutual aid partners, but that we really expect mutual aid to be mutual and comparable and have parity in it. And monitor that closely and give them feedback if that's not the case. That was my last slide, so I would entertain any questions you might have for me.
Chief, if I can, just one more addition. Some of you might have received a call from a resident recently regarding the transport. That's why I asked the chief to give a little more clarification on the transport. This one citizen was asking questions about the fact that why isn't transports just part of the taxes that they pay? Why are they being charged separately for transport? If the EMS came out, why do they need to pay that additional amount? So we did explain that process. He is one of those that's in that 8% that the chief talked about, which means it's a private pay. Most of the time, residents, sometimes they won't even really see it. They might get a bill, and then it just goes away because the insurance company kind of caught up with that bill and made that payment. However, for this individual, that's not the case. Their deductible hadn't been met, and so there is an out-of-pocket expense. And we just want to make sure, we haven't revisited that in a long time, even though we did recently increase the amount for our transports. We hadn't done any increases, Chief, for
Yeah,
since the
it was,
beginning, probably.
it was the first increase since EMS transport had been adopted.
Okay,
Yep.
so we did have that recent change, but I just want to make sure the council's aware. I know at least one of you probably received a call, but if that's something you want to revisit later on, that's something for the council to consider. Just what is that, and how would we then factor that into the budget? Because as you can see, roughly 1.4 million, I believe, is included in there for the revenue. But should there be something that's done regarding the hardship piece for that 8%? And so that's up for the council to kind of think about as we go through budget, but I want to make sure I made you aware of it.
One thing I'll add to that conversation with regard to the deductible, if you will, is we actually see this a fair amount. People should probably expect to get their bill for their EMS transport within a week or two of being transported. If you're unfamiliar with hospital billing at all, you might not see that hospital bill for 8 months, sometimes the way it works. So unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is they haven't met their deductible in their insurance yet. They're still going to end up paying that same amount and it trickles down, but because our bill comes first and they haven't met the deductible yet, our bill becomes the out-of-pocket piece. Had the medical bill beat ours to the mailbox, they would have had to pay a portion of that medical bill. They would have achieved their deductible, and then our bill would have been picked up by the insurance. So oftentimes, that's how people end up in the self-pay predicament, is that our bill beats the hospital bill. And they're going to get a hospital bill because we wouldn't have billed them if we didn't bring them to the hospital. But our bill beats them there, and we end up with the self-pay before they get to their deductible. So,
Is there any other questions for Chief at this time? No?
thank you for your time.
No, Chief, thank you very much for the hard work you're doing. And the staff, convey that to them if you could.
Mr. Mayor, I would just add that this is the third presentation from departments. The economic development was our first presentation at the last meeting. You have police and fire. You will be seeing all the departments come before you prior to the budget workshops.
Communications, not reports on committees, but is there any communications of announcements to the city or the city council? Anybody going around? I'm looking for some. None being, I've got a couple, and then I'll turn it over to the manager if he has some. First, just so you know, I'll be giving a presentation to the Greater Portland Council of Governments on zoning and housing attainability. That will happen on January 25th. It'll be via Zoom. I'll make sure the invite is out to all of you so you can attend. Be myself, the mayor of Westbrook, staff from GP COG, as well as a form-based zoning expert from the state of Michigan. So it should be a pretty good hour and a half afternoon coffee. Second, we have our Winter Festival. Counselor Walker, help me out, January 27th, correct?
8, 9, and 30th.
27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th of January, Winterfest. There'll be events throughout the entire city, New Auburn, Anniversary Park, to Lost Valley, Pettingill Park, cross-country skiing. Please go online to the Recreation Department website. You can get a lot more information. Lastly, I have communications to the entire city. I've updated the council on this already. This really dovetails into what both Chief Moen and Chief Chase, talked about with regards to recruitment. This also is in response to a lot of issues we're having with staffing throughout all departments of the city, as well as in the school department as well, with regards to everything from teachers to ed techs to administrators to bus drivers. We're seeing a highly competitive scenario or situation out there, an environment for a limited amount of staff, and we have some negatives that are hampering our recruitment effort. I'd like to attack that a little bit right now with this proposal that will come up to the council for further deliberation and a vote on our February 7th meeting on this one. I'll read it out to the public right now. This is regarding an Arpa, American Recovery Protection Act, Employee Home Ownership Incentive Program. One of the goals of the City Council is to increase opportunities for current and future Auburn City and school employees to relocate to the City of Auburn, establish roots, and more fully integrate into the fabric of our community. By using targeted ARPA, or federal ARPA funds, as an incentive, we can further multiple City Council goals. 1, take back our neighborhoods by increasing the amount of city staff living within the city. Issues will be addressed quicker, and neighborhood bonds will be strengthened. 2, increase the number of attainable housing units through an increase in supply. 3, further enhance Auburn's reputation as an employer of choice in a very tight hiring market. Through budgeted proposed right now is $500,000. The terms of this grant are as follows. For every municipal employee, whether it be fire, police, school, they will be eligible for a $20,000 grant to build a new home, multi-unit building, or accessory dwelling unit. This grant is non-repayable as long as that individual maintains employment with the City of Auburn and their respective departments and lives in the home for 5 years, or in the case of an ADU, lives in the primary residence for a period of 5 years. This can be leveraged with other complementary programs, from Maine State Housing Association owner-occupied grants, Sustainable Auburn grants, FHA, VA construction loans, home funds, and what I proposed earlier tonight during workshop, Auburn's owner-occupied housing grant. So there's a way to combine this grant with other grants. Return on investment is important. We've been talking about this now for several meetings and months, especially with ARPA funds from the federal government. This should generate roughly $100,000 in additional or net gain property tax revenue annually going forward, inclusive of excise tax. Again, that's an estimate, and that could change. We will absolutely apply smart principles to this if this is adopted and rolled forward, so we can quantify it and track it and gain the success, and look at the ability of it to be successful with recruiting and retention. I will have this document posted on our agenda electronically. I'll get out to Sue, and then it'll be in the minutes. But at this point, is there any questions from the City Council on this program that we have not covered earlier this evening? No? Thank you very much. So that is the announcement on that one. So there's 2 new construction incentive programs for the City of Auburn. This one, that's proposed, both proposed, for city employees. The second one, for anyone who builds a multi-unit owner-occupied building within the City of Auburn. Okay, so they're very, very similar, but I want to make sure they're separate. They're separate proposals with separate goals, though they do intertwine a little bit towards the end. Okay? Thank you. Mr. Manager, do you have any communications?
All set.
Yeah. We're going to move on to open session, first open session of the night. Members of the public are invited to speak to the council about any issue directly related to city business that is not on tonight's agenda. Members that would like to speak may do so by stepping up to the podium. State your name and address. Limit your comments to 3 minutes, please. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak? None being? We'll be moving on to unfinished business. Next is ordinance 01-03-2022, amending Auburn's Code of Ordinances, section 2-58, time and place of regular meetings. Second reading. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A motion from Councilor Staples, second from Councilor Whiting. Open this up to the public for comment. Anybody in the public like to comment on this? None being, I'll bring it back to the council. Council, any debate? None? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Hawes,
Yes.
Counselor Milks,
Yes.
Counselor Moran,
Yes.
Counselor Walker,
Yes.
Counselor Staples,
Yes.
Counselor Gary,
Yes.
Counselor Whiting.
Yes.
Order passes by a vote of 7-0. Next is ordinance 02-0103-2022, amending Auburn's Code of Ordinances, section 2-430, membership, responsibility, regulatory advisory board. Second reading. Do I have a motion?
So be it.
I got a
Second.
motion. Councilor Walker, second from Councilor Staples. Open this up to the public for comment. Any comment from the public on this issue? Now I'll bring it back to the council. Council, is there any questions or debate?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to amend.
Okay, Councilor Milks?
I'd like to amend the ordinance to include members of the Regulatory Advisory Board shall be residents of the city and shall not be officers or employees of the city. Persons appointed by the city council to serve on other boards, agencies, panels, and/or commissions shall not serve concurrently on the Regulatory Advisory Board. And I'd add, this is similar language to what's on the planning board.
Yeah. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second for Councilor Hawes. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to amend the current language on the second reading. Did you want to add, Councilor Hawes or Councilor Mills, did you want to add anything to this? It is identical to the language in the planning board, which is another adjudicatory board. Say that 3 times fast. Any other comment, debate?
Could the chair state the question?
Say again. I'm sorry, Councilor Staples?
Could you state the question with the amendment?
Yes. Is there any other comment or, comment or debate upon the motion to amend the ordinance to require, and I'm going to paraphrase this, to require that members of the Regulatory Advisory Board not serve on any additional city boards, commissions, or agencies, nor shall they be employees of the City of Auburn.
Thanks.
No further questions? Okay, I'd like to take a...
Mr. Mayor, just point of information, why is this brought up? Do we have question about the current members of the board
I'll
not
refer that to
being
Councilor Mills.
residents or employees or on other boards?
No, I'd say the reason that I believe in this is that it's similar to the planning board, where it's making it's making important decisions that affect multiple areas within the city. And so that's the reason.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to ask for a vote on the motion to amend. All those in favor of the motion stated by Councilor Milks, please raise your hand. 4, 5, opposed? Abstain? I'm sorry, Councilor Whiting? I didn't see. Approve? Okay, so, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask for that vote again. I'm still getting used to turning around a lot here. All those in favor of the motion? Very good. Opposed? Passed by a vote of 6-1. Okay. Now, the original motion's on the floor. Any other comment on the original motion, ordinance? None being, I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Counselor Hawes,
Yes.
Counselor Milks.
Yes.
Counselor Moran,
Yes.
Counselor Walker,
Yes.
Counselor Staples,
Yes.
Counselor Gary,
No.
Counselor Whiting,
Yes.
Order passes second reading, amended, vote 6-1. Okay, now we're moving on to new business here. Just bear with me because I have to go and flip back a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to take the 3 consent items first on appointments to planning board. We're going to take them one at a time. I'll remind the council too, if at any time they would like to go into an executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 6, please make that motion. It requires a 2/3 vote to do so. If there's anything confidential you'd like to speak on.
Mr. Mayor, can I just give one more clarification?
Please.
If during this process, because it's been a while since we've done this, and as well as for the new council, But if any time you are speaking about an individual applicant, then that's what that executive session is for. That should not be done in public regarding the individual, but it should be done in an executive session process. So just want to make sure everyone has that clarification about a specific individual, not necessarily their qualifications, but if you get into the character of an individual and their reputation or their involvement in the community that might be negative, we should not do that in public forum. That's why the executive session is in place.
And furthermore, I would not tolerate that too, coming from a member of the public at the podium. We do have rules in this organization, as well as Robert's rules, that guard folks from libel and derogatory comments, especially non-elected. So, with that said, I will now entertain a motion on the order of 07-011-82022, appointing Brian Dubois to the Planning Board as a full member with a term of expiration of 1/1/2025. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Councilor Milks, Councilor Walker on the second. Anybody from the public like to speak on this appointment? Now being, I'll bring it back to the council. Council, discussion? None being, I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? None being, passes by a vote of 7-0. Next, Order 08-011-82022, appointing Tony Ferraro to the Planning Board as full member with a term of expiration of 1/1/2024. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion, Councilor Milks. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Councilor Hawes. Anybody from the public like to speak on this? None being, I'll bring it back to the council. Council, any discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor?
I was a member of the planning board for 13 years. I really enjoyed it. I'm concerned about turnover on that board. When I was on the board, it was very stable. I mean, part of the turnover is because we've got two counselors who are on the planning board, so I realize it's not, necessarily abnormal turnover. But my concern is, I think, we're paying people to be on the planning board. And so I think we need to select, we're acting, in effect, as a personnel board here. So I think we should, essentially hire the best qualified people. It's not to disparage Mr. Ferrero or Mr. Daigle, but I think there are more qualified, more experienced people. For example, Mr. Martelli, who has, I think, served for 4 years and is a full member and is not being, reappointed. And if I look at the pool of applicants, Mr. Hayes was chairman of the planning board, served on the planning board for 13 years, and is probably one of the most knowledgeable people in this city. And given all of the difficult and complicated, extensive work that we're throwing to the planning board, I think it would be in our best interest to rethink these other two appointments. And it's nothing personal against these people. They're perfectly fine people. But I think it's, something we should have an open discussion about. When I was at Auburn Housing and we had a board that was really, really, green, it was difficult. And we had some term limits. We got away from term limits briefly just so we could keep some stability. And I'd just be concerned about that with all of the activity going on there, with rezoning proposals, et cetera. So that's my two cents worth.
Thank you, Councilor. I'd like to turn it over to the chair of the appointment committee right now, Mr. Milks, if you want.
Sure.
Do you have anything to say about this?
I understand what Mr. Whiting has said, and I value his opinion. I can tell you that from my opinion, and the reason that I make the decision that I only was one vote, and I was voted to chair. I'm not the chair. It's each meeting we vote a chair, so I was the chair of the appointment committee for there. But what I have heard from being on the strategic plan, steering committee of the strategic plan, talking to my constituents over my last term and this term, and having been part of the appointment committee over the last term and now here, that there is people that in the past have been upset with that seems to be a small group of people that are making all the decisions, and that when I especially heard it during the strategic plan, where people were really excited, and there was over 100 people came out to be part of the city. And when I looked at this particular planning board, there are established people that are there that have experience, and we took somebody that was an associate and made them a full member. And the positions that we're putting somebody into, is one of them is an associate position, which is a learning position. So in addition, when I make a decision, and I've got 30 years in corporate America and in the private sector, building teams, that I do what I think is the right decision when I have that choice. And so I will say that I received a phone call from somebody that was very upset with me for one of the decisions, one of those folks that you're questioning. But at the same time, I also received a phone call from somebody that was very excited about that person, and that they bring a different viewpoint and a different perspective. I'll add that, I nominated it into an all-male board, the first female. And one of these folks that you're objecting to is another female. And there's different perspectives and different situations, and I think that both Ms. Ferraro and the firefighter, Mr. Daigle, are qualified people and capable. And so that's the reason that I, as one member, voted for those people. And that's the reason I did it, so.
Councilor Gary, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know any of these appointments or very well, and I too question that these appointments, for the simple reason you guys have worked, Mr. Mayor, you've worked hard on the future land use. You worked hard on the comp plan. You worked hard on the strip zoning, and we're on a fast track to get a lot of stuff accomplished with the planning board. Because of the fast track, I'm afraid that some of these people that are being put on the board is going to slow down your process. As much as I would like to see, and I'm being honest here.
I appreciate your concern. I don't share that concern.
Oh, no.
But I appreciate that sentiment.
As much as I'd like to see, this is what I'm admitting to, as much as I'd like to see the planning board slowed down so that there'd be more thoughtful discussion, more input from the public, I'm concerned that we are replacing a full member and putting him out in the cold, that he's worked hard on the planning board, he does his homework, he does a good job, and now if he decides he wants to come back, he's going to have to be an associate.
Actually, in point of clarification, that's not true. You can come in and apply for a full-time position without being an associate if the position is open.
Right, but there is not going to be one, at least not for a while.
We'd all like to hopefully know the future. Is there any other comment on this? If not,
I'd like to comment.
Councilor Staples.
I was also on the appointment committee, and I think it's important that my peers on the city council understand a little bit of my thought behind this. I came here from the planning board. I have a lot of confidence in the planning board. I think the planning board has incredible leadership. Chairman Duvall, Mr. Sierre, Ms. LeBlanc, who actually referred Ms. Ferraro to us, someone that I have a lot of respect for. I found her to be highly thoughtful and competent. And I also look at the actual advertised desired skills and background for people that this is the message we're giving out to the community on who we're looking for. And I always think more inclusion is important. And I have a lot of respect for the people that have dedicated their time. But it's the same people over and over again, and many of them on multiple boards and multiple committees. And the more people from different demographics and different locations in the city, the more equitable we're going to make this process. And I am super excited about the possibility of empowering women to engage in the city's political process. I think that's important. And I know Ms. LeBlanc sits alone as the only female on the planning board. And it's a small community. I also know that Ms. Ferraro is the 2021 Realtor of the Year. I understand, being a realtor, that you don't just purchase and sell properties. You need to really understand at a deep level zoning. If you're doing a building package, there's a lot of requirements that are relevant to that position that translate very well to the planning board. And I think that's really exhibited by what I saw from Mr. Dubois. He, on the board, showed a very acute understanding of zoning and its implications on development and on the community, and he had a pretty unique perspective. And I'll say this, there was a time when I was on the planning board and I tried to defer my opinion to someone more senior, and it was actually Mr. Staples that confirmed to me that my voice really mattered and that was important. And I thank him for that, because if he wouldn't have done that, I might actually not even be sitting here today. I believe Ms. Ferraro has the skill set to do it. I think the planning board currently has great leadership. I think the more diverse we can make these boards and the more new people we can bring into our city political process, it's going to make us stronger. Thank you.
Councilor Staples?
I'd like to make a motion to amend this order to appoint Steve Martelli as a full member of the planning board.
So moved.
Got a motion on the floor to replace Ms. Ferraro with Mr. Martelli by Councilor Staples, second by Councilor Gary. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Motion fails by a vote of 4-3. Now, the original motion is still on the table. Is there any other comment, Ms. Ferraro? Would you like to speak and say something? This is on your order. You're here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Miss Ferraro. I was approached to be on the planning board, which was a surprise, but in the same token, it was very exciting. So I did a little research and tried to figure out really what the planning board was, watched some of the old videos, watched the new ones, watched some of the city council that I never really did, and it is extremely interesting. And I do love it, and I definitely think I'm qualified for this. I am a resident of Auburn. I work and breathe here in Auburn. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. But I also have lived here. I work here. My son goes to school at Edward Little. He plays multiple local sports. I volunteer with teens who are low income, so I try to help and raise money for those kids too. I do a lot of stuff for the city. I've also been in the hospitality business for on and off for 25 years, so I definitely have some of that part of experience as well. Sorry. I've been in real estate since 2014, and so I got my license in 2015. I've sold almost 300 houses, and I definitely feel like I have the capability of doing this job, and I'm thankful, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to ask for a vote. All those in favor of appointing Tony Ferraro as a full voting member to the planning board, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Passes. 5-2. Next on the agenda, let me pull it up again, is Order 09-011-82022, appointing Joshua Daigle to the planning board as an associate member with a term of expiration of 1-1-2023. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion, Councilor Hawes.
Second.
Second for Councilor Milks. Anybody in the public like to speak about this appointment? None being. Very good, then. We'll bring it back to the council. Council, anybody like to speak about the appointment of Mr. Daigle to the planning board as an associate member? I believe you pulled it from the consent. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. We talked about diversity, and we've appointed another female, which is great. Auburn Housing, I think, now has more women than men, or at least at one time did, which was the first, and that's great. But diversity is also about the backgrounds of people. So now we have 2 realtors and the son of a realtor. So we're kind of over-representing that group. We've already done that, so that's done. I think we need to think about diversity. For example, and I'm not saying we should appoint a farmer, but historically, the planning board has had a farmer on the board. Maurice Keene was one of the first. Charlotte Bosworth, I think, was chairperson. Alfred Libby, maybe? Think he may have been on the planning board. I don't know him personally, so I could be wrong about that. But I'm just looking at the diversity of the planning board and just feeling like we're sort of dropping the ball there. You know, I still would hold out for Bob Hayes and would propose substitution of him in this.
Okay, we'll let the debate go on, and then a motion to amend can be made at any time. I will state one thing, though. Never hold a son at fault for his father's sins.
No.
My dad was a chef. I can't make toast. Okay, so
Yeah,
just
no,
because my
I'm
dad
not-
was a chef doesn't mean I
I'm
can
not
cook.
impugning them at all.
Well, you know, you don't want to have a son of a realtor on. There's an old saying at church, right? Son of the priest, grandson of the devil. So let's move on then. Is there anybody that would like to speak in support of Mr. Daigle? You spoke last time first, Councilor Milks. I mean, the 3 appointment.
Yeah, I'll speak again.
Please.
Once again, Mr. Daigle was already civically involved in Complete Streets. Young man, Ward 1, I believe, if I recall correctly. Firefighter, we really liked that perspective. We thought that a public safety perspective on the planning board would be advantageous. And then once again, just somebody that's young and motivated. The last thing we want to do is stymie their interest. And I liked the public safety perspective on that.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask the committee a question? I noticed that he works for 2 fire departments. Is he going to be able to make meetings? I mean, the way.
Well, I
what we've
certainly
heard from
think you need to give-
Chief Chase, they're having trouble staffing. There's lots of overtime, people working 1 day, 2 days, 3 days in a row. He's a great candidate. However, if he's working for 2 different fire departments, is he even going to be able to make
And
meetings?
again, before that, I'd like this not to be answered at this point, because at this point, we're talking about his professional ethics, his work. We're probably going into a little bit of murky water. Understand your point, but conjecture made about a person's time. We do have attendance policies within planning board that
That's true.
are there.
Yeah,
Okay, and if he doesn't, or anybody doesn't for that matter, they will handle their own policies internally, and we'll have the appointment back to us if that's a position which they decide to go. Okay? Is there any other comment about Mr. Daigle and his appointment? None being, I'll ask for a vote at this time.
Mr. Mayor?
All those in favor? I've called the
Mr.
vote.
Mayor?
I'm sorry, ma'am, I've called the vote. All those in favor of Mr. Daigle on the planning board, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Abstain? I'm sorry, Councilor Staples, I didn't get your vote. Oppose?
No, I was in favor.
You're in favor. Okay, so it passes 5-2. Thank you for the clarification. Just try to keep your hands up a little because I'm counting. It's slow. I got my shoes on. Okay. Let me get back to new business that was originally on the agenda. Remote meeting policy, I'm sorry, hold on. Okay, I'm sorry, back to new business. Here we go. Next is order number 17-011-92022, adopting the revised CDBG-CV budget as presented. This is a public hearing and a vote. And we do have staff here to answer any questions. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Councilor Gary, second.
Second.
Councilor Staples. Okay, I'll open this up to the public. Public, are any members like to speak tonight? None? Okay, we'll bring it back here. Council, any questions, debate? Clear? Okay, I'd like to ask for a vote at this time. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstained? None being? Passes 7-0. Next is Order 18-011-92022, adopting the remote meeting policy pursuant to 1 MRSA, Section 403-B. Public hearing and vote. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Councilor Staples. And second? Councilor Whiting, thank you. Open this up to the public. Any members of the public that would like to speak on this issue? No? Any members of the council?
Just point of information, please.
Yes, Counselor?
I thought we had put a policy in place during the last council. So if we did, or is this something that's going to be done every council?
No, you do not have a remote policy by the council. That has not been implemented. You used remote during the COVID when we were
Right.
not meeting. One thing that the state moved forward with recent legislation was that if municipalities wanted to continue with a remote meeting, you had to have a policy to do so. So it wouldn't require an emergency order, but a policy
Right.
had to be in place. We currently do not have a policy for remote.
Well, then this is cool then.
Yeah, it's all new.
Okay, any other questions? None being, I'd like to ask for a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? None being, passes 7-0.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to motion to suspend the rules.
Okay, I have a motion to temporarily suspend the rules.
Yep, and,
I'm sorry, to do
To
what?
make an appointment, a nomination to the planning board.
Very good. I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Hawes. Motion made by Counselor Mix.
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Paul Jakes.
I'm sorry, hold on. I need a vote on the suspension of the rules
Okay.
first before you can do anything.
Okay.
All those in favor of suspending the rules in order to further a nomination to the planning board, please raise your hand. 4. Those opposed? Unfortunately, the motion to suspend needs a 2/3 vote, correct? Or a majority? It needs 5.
5.
So the motion to suspend cannot happen. Can't carry. Moving on, reports. Mayor's report. I'm sorry, open session, last open session of the night. Is there anybody that would like to speak on a topic that's not on tonight's agenda?
Kathy Shaw, Valley View Farm, Auburn, Maine. I just wanted to give folks a little bit of an update that we are trying to create a small farmers market in Auburn this season. The work is ongoing. Who knows what will happen, but we're looking to create one. Thank you for your time.
Is there any other members of the public that would like to speak? Okay, none being, we're going to bring this back to reports. Mayor's report. As you know, I'm on the school committee as the mayor's rep. Makes sense. We've had a couple of meetings. We have another one tomorrow evening. I have been appointed the chair of the finance department. So we had our first meeting on finance. I have to tell you, in my 4 years as mayor with the current administration of the school board, transparency on fiscal issues, very, very excited. It's refreshing to see. They're adopting a lot of the policies that the municipal side has with regards to finance reports on a monthly basis and so forth. So it's really exciting to kind of get in those numbers. I'm hoping that this whole budgetary process will be good. And that's really the only report I have at this point. The meetings are really starting to ramp up in the next couple of weeks. So I'll just start over here to the left. Raise your hand if you got anything. No, Councilor Walker? Go
I
for it.
just got one comment to make about what we just finished doing, putting people on the board. Steve Martelli, he lives with me. And Steve Martelli, I asked him directly because I would have supported Steve. He said that he was ready to take off the next 2 years. And if he wanted to come back, he would apply in the next opening after that. So we sit here and we want to appoint people, but we don't know if them people want to be on or not. Steve Martelli did not want to be on the next 2 years.
And thank you, Councilor Walker. I understand. Just like to get down through reports and reports only and no commentary if we could. You get me on, yeah, it's a report of some sort. Councilor Moore? Good? Come back. Milks?
I'm good.
All set.
All trails are open at Auburn Nordic Ski Association. They were,
Sharpen the edges.
they were done, I think it was 4 hours of grooming, and they were grooming at Lost Valley too, so things are looking good. Even though we got an inch of rain, we got probably 6 inches of snow, helping the winter carnival,
Yeah.
we hope.
Yeah, well, it should be good. I don't think it's going to melt between now and then. Councilor Gary?
The only thing I'd like to say is First Auburn Seniors is meeting tomorrow for their regular meeting.
Very good.
Usually it's, the membership is gaining, I mean, it's gaining on a meeting basis. We were up to over 50 people for the last few meetings, and they're all newbie, a lot of them are newbies. So that's all accredited, or a lot, to the volunteers that run First Auburn Seniors and our president, which is Counselor Walker.
Can I give a?
Yeah.
I changed my mind. I want a quick update.
One mulligan.
Airport Board, we're going to be happy to be welcoming in a new airport manager. Sat in on my first meeting, super interesting, a really unique resource for the city. A lot of emphasis on customer service and safety, so more shall be revealed.
Okay, very good then. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a few items under the city manager's report. One, the Legislative Policy Committee, which is part of Maine Municipal Association, will begin our process to review all the bills that are moving forward through Augusta. The mayor, myself, and Assistant City Manager Wood are on that committee. That'll begin January 20th as we begin that process. Part of this is about what position will Maine Municipal Association take on behalf of municipalities and towns as these bills move forward at a committee level and testify at those committee levels. So that'll be action that's taken. We don't always agree with the decision the LPC takes. That doesn't mean that we can't then go before the legislators and share as a municipality how we feel about that issue. But standing within Maine Municipal Association is all about really protecting the core of Maine Municipal, which work that they do, which involves the revenue share, which involves homestead, reimbursement, those type of elements that really impact all municipalities. That's that core component. And then these other elements as we look at how these other bills might impact a community, we discuss. The budget process is underway. All the departments will have their budgets turned in to the finance director by the 20th. The finance director will start putting that together, and the budget team that I put together will begin meeting next week to start reviewing all department budgets rather, and we'll be getting geared up for our presentation to you very soon. Hiring and retention, you've heard this with the two departments that were here, fire and police. Just as for you to know, this is across the board, all departments. Just like the private sector, we're struggling the same way with hiring and retention of our staff. Know that we are meeting with our HR director. We are talking about each position. We're evaluating those positions. A lot of times when positions come available, it's a good time to evaluate it. It's also a good time to look at the job description. How are we promoting that position? What's the title? Believe it or not, title will determine who applies for positions a lot of times. So we are evaluating that. We're spending time and digging into that. COVID ongoing, but here's a report for us is that it is impacting us in certain departments. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing a cycle go through the city within certain departments. Right now, it's within the tax office. We have several members of our tax office that are out. And so we did have to push out information yesterday that we're reducing our hours in the tax office. So from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., we're not able to provide coverage because we have staff that have a lunch break that they need to take. That's the only time we could do it. We did not have any backup of staff to be able to keep that window open. Ice rinks, so the Public Works Department has worked really hard at putting together 2 ice rinks in the community. One in the futsal court at the Gully near off from Chestnut Street by the Pal Center. That ice rink, when it's completely ready, obviously this storm pushed it back a little bit, but when that ice rink is ready, the Pal Center does have ice skates that are available. Individuals in the community can go to the Pal Center. They can take ice skates out from there and return them. We have a great system in place. One of our local businesses, Played Against Sports, has sharpened those skates for us to make sure they're good to go for each season. So, and our second rink is at Anniversary Park. That will be part of the Winter Festival. So again, as long as we're having good weather, but they were able to get a good base on that rink before the snowstorm. So we feel really good about that and being able to use that. The last item that I want to update the council on is regarding our weather that we've had. We've roughly used about 50% of our salt that we usually have for the winter. We budget for about 4,500 tons. And as you all know, you've been dealing with your own driveways. We've had a very icy winter so far. And so crews are out trying to apply salt as much as we can, sand when necessary. Obviously, this storm here has created a lot of issues. Know that the staff is out tonight, the Public Works crew is out tonight, working on those sidewalks to ensure that they are safe, that we're applying sand where necessary, and working at other areas just so they're in better shape. So just wanted to give you council and the community update on that we do know the challenges, and the staff is out working on those. That's it.
Well, I'd like to entertain a motion for only one more storm of 24 inches and freezing temps for cross-country ski trails. Yeah, 50% of the salt budget, and we only had, what, like 9-10 inches?
You could use the other 50% on my driveway right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, cross-country skate down your place. We are going to suspend, or not suspend, but we're going to push off the finance report. Ms. Eastman isn't here tonight, so I'd like to have her here. So we'll do the December's report, the first meeting in February. At that point, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I got a motion, Councilor Mills, Sixburg, Councilor Walker. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? I didn't think so. Stand adjourned.